I never thought my parents, who doted on my genius younger sister, would tell me I was not needed. One child is enough, we don't need a failure like you. With those words, my parents cast me out while I was still a child. The one who offered me a helping hand in my confusion was my uncle. Sorry for being poor, but let's live together. I took that hand without hesitation. My name is Amy. I am now 30 years old, but I have a complicated past. It's about family circumstances, but first, I want you to hear my story. I was born into a typical family, with a businessman father and a stay-at-home mother. I lived with my grandparents at my father's ancestral home, and my unmarried uncle also lived with us. I started living there when I was 4, and my uncle was 24 at the time. Living with your parents at that age isn't rare. But my uncle had a reason he couldn't leave home. As a child, I didn't know the details, but it seems he was frail from a young age. Even as an adult, he was often ill and couldn't keep a job. Eventually, he became a part-timer, but he could only work a few hours a day, a couple of days a week. It probably wasn't enough income to live on his own. Maybe because he felt a sense of inferiority for still being dependent on his parents. My uncle always looked apologetic. "Damn, what a burden you are." My father would often yell at him, always when the grandparents were not around. My grandparents loved both their healthy son and frail son equally. Due to the recession and reduced income, my father, who relied on his parents, probably wanted to restrain himself in front of them. However, when the grandparents weren't around, he always said terrible things to my uncle and laughed at him with disdain. My uncle, though looking sad, never got angry or talked back. "Why don't you get angry?" I asked innocently as a child. With a troubled look, my uncle replied, "Because it's true that I rely on my parents." Back then, I thought that made sense, but now as an adult, I think my father relies on them too, so he's not in a position to talk. If I had understood that back then, I would have sided with my uncle. As a child who didn't understand, I felt bad when my father yelled at my uncle but couldn't say anything. Even though the atmosphere was tense when the grandparents weren't around, it was peaceful when they were. In front of the grandparents, my uncle would relax and smile, and my father wouldn't show his true feelings. My mother was too busy taking care of me and my 2-year younger sister, Heather, to bother about the relationship between my father and uncle. I thought life would always continue like this. However, everything suddenly changed. My grandparents died in an accident when I was 6 years old. It was very sad and lonely, and I cried a lot. Heather and I cried loudly together. I remember my uncle quietly shedding tears. But what I remember most, what I can't forget, was my father's laughter. Yes, he was laughing. His own parents had died. But he didn't cry once when he rushed to the hospital or during the funeral preparations. It wasn't about being stoically brave. Even as a child, I understood that my father wasn't sad. And that turned into a certainty. On the day of the funeral, my father was laughing. He probably thought no one was watching, but I happened to see him. And I clearly saw that expression. It wasn't a smile that comes from sorrow or confusion. As his daughter, I knew it was a smile from genuine happiness. My father was happy about the death of his parents, probably thinking about the various inheritances. That smile was so ugly that it scared me, and I cried. They must have thought I was crying because the grandparents had died. My uncle gently patted my head and stroked it. Looking up, I saw his tear-stained red eyes, yet they were incredibly kind. What was this? My father and uncle, actual brothers, had such opposite reactions to their parents' death. It was a moment when I felt a great disconnect with my father. After that, my father's attitude drastically changed. First, his treatment of my uncle became overtly worse. Why do I have to care for a useless person like you? Be grateful I even let you live here. If you can't pay rent or anything, I'll take all the inheritance. At the time, I didn't understand, but it was completely unreasonable. The inheritance rights should have been equal between siblings. But my father monopolized it. My uncle could have stood firm or sought legal recourse. But he didn't. Even though he looked sad, no matter what my father said. He didn't argue back or claim his inheritance. Worried about my uncle, who looked increasingly unwell, I asked, "Are you okay?" He weakly smiled and said, "I can't really work properly because of my poor health. It can't be helped." Despite being verbally abused by my father every day, my frail uncle grew thinner and his complexion worsened. Yet, he still smiled at me and said, "I'm okay." However, 3 months after the grandparents' death, my uncle was eventually kicked out of the house. "Get out, you parasite," he was told. And my uncle left without arguing or resisting. "Uncle, I don't want you to go." I was sad about parting from my kind uncle and pulled his arm. But he gently removed my hand and stroked my head. "It's okay. Amy, you're a strong girl. You'll be fine even without me." "Uncle, you're not okay, are you?" My uncle, who couldn't work properly due to his poor health. How was he going to survive alone? I looked at him with tears in my eyes, and he said, "I'll be okay," and left. The farewell to my uncle was sad. But as a child, there was nothing I could do. Moreover, I soon became unable to worry about others. 2 years after the grandparents' death, when I was 8 years old, I was attending elementary school normally. And Heather was 6. About to start elementary school. In kindergarten, they said Heather is smart, my mother started. Maybe she's a genius like me, my father got excited. And impulsively had her take an intelligence test. The result was astonishing. IQ 150. Definitely my genes. Heather scored an incredible IQ of 150. I didn't quite understand. But I knew somehow my sister was amazing. "Heather, you're amazing." "Thank you, big sister." I praised my sister without fully understanding, and she happily smiled. Those were good times. Until then, they were good. After that, it was the worst. "All right, let's get her into a competitive school," my father declared, driven by his mysterious confidence. "She's a genius, so it'll be fine," he said, and my mother became motivated. After that, Heather started attending cram school every day. Naturally, my mother was the one accompanying her, which meant she neglected our home. Then my father started. "Hey, since Mom and Heather are busy, you take care of the house," he said to me. From then on, laundry and cleaning became my responsibility. After school ended, I couldn't play with friends. I had to go straight home and do chores, or I'd be scolded by my parents. If I didn't do them properly, I'd be skipped dinner. "We don't have time to care for a failure like you," they said. "Why can't you score perfectly?" Seeing a score in the 90s on my test, my father yelled at me. "Seriously, learn something from your sister for once," my mother said with exasperation. No matter how well I did on tests or how many races I won at the sports festival, My parents never looked at me, never praised me, they just ignored me. Like a machine, they only ever said, "Learn from your sister Heather." And then they added, "Well, it's probably impossible for you anyway. Heather is a genius, but you are incompetent." Heather really was a genius. She learned rapidly with just a short time at cram school, and passed the entrance exams in no time. As a result, my parents became even colder to me. They spent money on Heather. I couldn't even get new clothes and struggled with the ones I had outgrown. Heather got to eat delicious food. I got leftovers. Heather went on trips. I stayed home alone. My parents blatantly doted only on Heather. This child will surely be someone great in the future. Then our retirement will be secure, my father would say with a laugh. A doctor would be good, wouldn't it? Or maybe a lawyer. Even aiming for a politician is not bad. With a genius daughter like Heather, we're super lucky. I was invisible in my parents' eyes. My existence, crying in Heather's shadow, was forgotten. And when I was 10 years old, my parents finally said it. "We need money for Heather's gifted education, so we don't need you." Huh? Confused by what that meant, my father said. "We're saying one child, Heather, is enough." No way. How am I supposed to, by myself? Well, I'll give you your brother's contact. Here's some pocket money. Figure it out on your own. They really gave me just a small amount of money. And I was truly kicked out. I cried and pleaded at the front door to let me in. But there was no response. The door did not open. Desperate, I headed straight to the station. At 10 years old, I had enough knowledge to manage, even to ride a train. Asking people for directions, I somehow made it to my uncle's apartment. The bell rang, and my uncle came out with the same kind face as I remembered. He was shocked to see me and let me in. When I explained the situation, he was furious. What are my brother and his wife thinking? I felt sorry and depressed even though I wasn't the one being scolded. Wondering if I was just a burden, tears slowly formed in my eyes. Then, a hand gently placed on my bowed head. Just like in my memories, it was a large, warm, kind hand. "It's been tough, hasn't it? You're safe now. But what should I do now? As you can see, I still often get sick and don't make much money, I'm poor," my uncle said with a wry smile. But he looked much stronger than when we lived together before. Maybe being away from my father brought some change in his heart. He looked me straight in the eye and smiled. "Sorry I'm poor, but Amy, if you don't mind, I'd be happy to become your parent." Huh? I mean, in this case, maybe more like a foster father? I might not be very reliable, but... Before he could finish, I jumped into his broad chest. Unlike my father, my uncle's chest felt very safe. "It's all okay now." Relieved, I sobbed uncontrollably, and my uncle gently stroked my back. It felt just like a real parent who genuinely loved me. Since then, I grew up under my uncle's care. Indeed, we were poor and he was often sick, which was tough. But even in poverty, our home had smiles. I had almost forgotten how to smile while living with my parents. But living with my uncle, I began to smile a lot. A poor yet happy family, exactly that. My uncle gave me a lot of love. I worked hard in everything to repay my uncle's kindness. He praised me when I tried hard. Even if the results were bad, he praised the effort. I was so happy I tried even harder. The existence of my parents, who never praised me, eventually faded from my memory. I grew up healthy with my uncle, and 20 years passed in a flash. I turned 30. And now, familiar faces stood before me. Mom, Dad. It's been a while, Amy. You been living well? Smiling was my father, pushed to the back of my distant memories. He had aged considerably, with hardly any hair left. My gaze towards him was cold. Naturally, it was a what now situation. Unperturbed by my icy gaze, my father said, "Well, let's put the past behind us and get along as a family from now on." My response was, "Of course, what? What are you talking about? Get along as a family? Don't joke with me. Figures, a failure like you would speak like that. Can't help it. I'll re-educate you from now. No thank you. Please leave." As my father tried to enter the apartment and I pushed him back, my mother joined in. "Amy, don't be stubborn, rely on us. Living in such a shabby apartment, you mustn't have had a good life. It's none of your business, please leave. Don't be strong-willed. Just let us in." "No, go away." "Let us in." "Go away." They're ridiculous, both in their mid-50s. Supposedly weakened, but still forcefully energetic. No, wait, if it's 2 against 1, of course I'd be pushed back. While thinking nonchalantly, don't cry if you're being pushed. My father managed to get a foot in the door. So I pushed back with all my might like a sumo wrestler. No. Eek. They fell on their butts from the momentum. I naturally looked down on them. "Ah, you're so annoying." "What?" "I'm busy, so can you please leave?" "What's with that attitude? What do you think of us, your parents?" "The moment you abandoned me, I stopped thinking of you as my parents." "But we raised you until you were 10. Until I was 10, huh? I feel like the only time I was properly raised was when my grandparents were still alive. But you managed to survive, didn't you? At that level, you don't have the right to act all high and mighty." As my parents stood up, rubbing their backs, they seemed much smaller. They were only in their 50s, yet they looked old enough to be in their 70s. "You were the ones who said one child, Heather, was enough. Since I have a genius sister, there's no need for you to come see me, right? That's not going to work anymore." My father grimaced bitterly at my words. Did something happen to Heather? Did she become a shut-in? She became a lawyer. Well, good for her. Amazing, isn't it? Just like someone with an IQ of 150. And then she disappeared. Amazing indeed. As I pressed for details, it turned out Heather had entered law school as expected. Went through graduate school and took the bar exam. She didn't pass on her first try, but did eventually. It's unclear. But after some training and whatnot, she officially became a lawyer. And yet, she disappeared? She said, "I won't take care of you guys," and left. Well, well. So, she abandoned you. Congratulations. That's not a happy occasion at all. That ingrate, returning all the care we've given her with betrayal. Well, there wasn't any love, was there? My parents thought they were doting on my sister. But it probably just felt suffocating for her. Parents who changed completely just over an IQ number. Parents who imposed excessive expectations. Parents who only pressed their own desires under the guise of affection. No wonder my sister had enough. Dad, the company went bankrupt. Tough economy, huh? There's virtually no severance pay. And the unemployment benefits are about to run out. Good for you. Not good at all. But looking for a new job at another company is too tough now. Too tough, huh? I can't help but laugh at their lack of enthusiasm. So, you should take care of us. My laughter instantly stopped. No, thank you. What? Are you saying you'll abandon your parents? The only parent I have is my uncle, who has been raising me since I was 10. Huh? My father looked stunned by my words. You came to this apartment, so you knew I was living with my uncle, right? What's there to be surprised about now? You think of him as your parent? The uncle who gave me all his love is my father. My parents, surprised by my implication that you never gave me any love. So you're not my parents, stared at me. Despite his frail health, my uncle worked hard. He tried his best so I wouldn't have to struggle. And I've worked really hard to repay his kindness. So, you have a decent job then? Pretty decent. I shrugged, and my father suddenly grabbed my shoulder. Let go. So, you're angry, and you're embarrassed. Listen to what I'm saying. No need to hear it all to understand. You were lonely, and you're sulking. That's right. You were always less loved than your sister, so you sulk. But you're happy and embarrassed to meet us, your parents. So, you're at Sundara. Don't just make things up. Don't worry, from now on, I'll be with you as a parent. I don't understand what he means. Is my father already suffering from dementia? I stared blankly at my parents' foolish faces, slowly beginning to laugh. What are you laughing at? Are you happy? No way. Just so you know, I haven't thought about you at all these past 10 years. Thanks to my uncle, I've been living a very fulfilling life. Surprised by my sudden laughter, I continued speaking. You know, I went to university on a scholarship. Oh, so you got a good job then? Yes. I got a job at a pretty famous large company. That's great. And I got married by chance. Oh. Then we must greet your husband too. No need. Yes, we must. It's impossible. He's overseas right now. Oh, what? And by the way, my uncle is also overseas. Huh? My brother too? How can that be? I thought you were living here alone. So I figured that frail guy must be. Don't just assume my uncle is dead. He got an overseas assignment. And it's a great place for rest, so he went with me. My uncle has gotten much healthier and is happily playing with my kids. Well, you have grandchildren too. Bombarded with all this sudden information, my parents looked like their heads were about to explode, their eyes darting around in confusion. I just smiled at them sweetly. At first, my uncle was reluctant about living together. But he finally agreed. We're all living happily as a family now. Then, we could also go overseas. You can, but we won't live together or take care of you. Live on your own money. That's impossible. Are you abandoning your parents? You abandoned me first. Frustrated by their selfish claims, I finally snapped. My parents turned pale. I owe nothing to you since you abandoned me. But I owe a great deal to my uncle. I plan to repay his kindness. At least send us some money. My uncle never touched the money I sent. And he continued to live in this shabby apartment. But he finally agreed to live together there, so I came to make arrangements. What? It's ironic that on the last day I'm leaving this rundown apartment, you show up. What a coincidence. Huh? What? You're leaving? The paperwork is done, and I'm just returning the keys. I'm heading back to my home overseas immediately. What about us? Are you abandoning your own mother? As my mother turned as pale as my father, I nodded emphatically. Thank you for abandoning me, I said with a smile, leaving them speechless. Really, thank you. Because of that, I'm happy now. With those words, I walked past them. How does it feel, the parents who abandoned their daughter? To be abandoned by both daughters? I asked one last question, but no answer came back. I didn't wait for one. And left, knowing this was the real farewell to my so-called parents. Afterward, I returned to my own home overseas. The efforts I put into living alone with my uncle paid off. And I managed to land a job at a good company. Then, I got an overseas assignment and married a man I met there. My uncle cried and blessed us. Now, children have been born. And I've invited my uncle to live with us. I'm happily living with my husband, children, and uncle. And I wish I could find a wonderful man like my sister's husband soon. My sister said, laughing as she watched the children play in the garden beside me. Well, you've finally been freed from our parents' curse. I'm sure you'll find someone great. I need to get used to the work here first. Why don't you get a lawyer's qualification here? I'd rather not be a lawyer. I'm done following our parents' orders. I want to work hard at a job I love. That makes sense. Right after I was abandoned and left home, my sister sent a letter to my uncle. It was about how she couldn't stand our parents' distorted love and pressure. My uncle and I decided to rescue her on her way back from school without letting our parents know. My sister wanted to come live with us too. But my uncle's financial situation couldn't support both siblings. Most importantly, our parents wouldn't allow it. So, she stayed at home until she could leave as soon as she was an adult. It was tough, but my sister overcame the challenges and gained her freedom. Seizing the opportunity when our parents were happy, she became a lawyer. My sister left home. Of course, I helped her with that. She's struggling with the language and adapting to new things here. But she'll be okay. After all, she endured living with our parents. I know no one more patient or hardworking than her. She'll adapt here soon. I'm more worried about my uncle. Uncle, you're going to language school? I said. And my sister nodded with a smile. That's right. It's never too late for anything. His health has improved a lot, and he needs to enjoy life now. Yes, he does. My parents, who had taken all the inheritance for themselves and squandered it, ran out of money quickly. Despite trying desperately to invest in their daughters, they faced unemployment. They sold the house. But since they had taken out loans against it, they ended up with little. They've been begging relatives for money, but everyone has treated them coldly, forcing them into poverty. Relatives have shared with me, chuckling, that my parents are constantly fighting. It's unthinkable to look down on siblings or discriminate among them. Yes, it is. My sister nodded again at my words. No matter what, I will protect you, Heather. I've already received enough protection. Thank you, big sister. When I felt a touch teary from my grown-up sister's words. What protection? A hand was placed gently on my head. Though he seemed smaller and more wrinkled, it was as warm as ever. I turned around, smiling. Thank you. Huh? Seeing my uncle's puzzled face, I laughed and said, Thank you, Dad. I love you.